So I'm here with Brad Afdahl, and Brad is a dairy farmer still,
Yep.
and somewhat of an anomaly today. You're a small dairy farmer and kind of plan on staying small.
Yeah, definitely.
And you don't really plan on getting out of dairy,
No.
which is good because we hear this way too much that, you know, the guys that are retiring aren't getting replaced, and you're not planning on going anywhere, and you did bring in another generation.
Yes. Yeah. We got our 19-year-old son Bo is with us full time, and then our 16-year-old son Ian is here when he can be.
So it's nice to hear that in this day and age where all you hear about is if you're not milking thousands of cows, you're wasting your time. And obviously, you get some value out of being a small dairy beyond just financial. You enjoy
Right.
that lifestyle.
Yeah, that was my whole point to be a farmer. Was I didn't grow up on a farm, but I always wanted to do all that farm work. I didn't fantasize about managing people. I fantasized about driving tractors and milking cows and working, fixing equipment, working with the soil. You know.
Yeah, and you do your own field work.
Right. Yeah, we do everything but spray.
Yep. So that's kind of a thing where for a while there it was be a small guy, buy your feed. You could do that.
Yeah.
But
And that's how we started. You know, I traded rent on a barn for some labor the first 2 years, and then we bought a 35-acre farm and buildings and bought the feed for the cows, raised the feed for the heifers, borrowed equipment from in-laws when we needed it, and took baby steps all the way to where we are now.
well, it's expensive. It's a lot of investment. You know.
The advantage to being small is you can get what everybody else has kind of thrown away pretty cheap. So nobody else is really looking for small equipment. You're wanting equipment bigger than the hobby farmer, but not what the 300 cow guys want or bigger. You know, so you can get good low-hour used stuff, you know, reasonably priced.
Well, and even dairy equipment. I mean, there was a time when to have a 2-inch pipeline was bragging rights, that you had a 2-inch, not an inch and a half. And
Yeah.
and now, how many 2-inch pipelines are left in use anywhere? I mean, just very few.
Right. Yeah.
So you know, there is an advantage there, and you know, and really, the other thing that we hear this all the time, and we'll get more into this in a little bit, but like you're still using upright silos, specifically Harvestores.
Yeah. I mean, we put them all up, too.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I know, kids, this is hard for you to hear, but there are still guys that milk in tie stall barns and actually built silos within these were within the last 20 years, right?
Yeah. The last one was 2015 and 2009, 2005, and that one was here, but we tore it down and rebuilt it and added 10 feet in 2009.
Okay. So, yeah, it's not, we focus too many on, you know, guys that are retiring and quitting. And some of that's just, they don't have another generation that's going to take it over, and they're ready to move on, which is fine.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
But it is neat to hear some more positivity towards dairy, you know, in this world where it seems like everything's so negative. But maybe we'll do a little farm tour after the video here, or later in the video. But we should show a tractor here, because that's usually what we do. So we'll do that, and then we'll sit down, and then we can talk about this farming history, because you did mention that you didn't grow up on a farm, but farming is in your family.
Right. Both my parents grew up on farms. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was on both sides of your family.
Yep.
So we'll discuss that. So now we got a tractor here, well, these aren't heirloom tractors to you, but would you say you're a John Deere guy now?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
It's hard not to be when the dealership's 4 miles away.
Well, right. And you know, and you want to get the 4320 in here, because they're just a cool tractor.
Yeah, you have to have one. Yeah.
Yeah, there's something about that. Well, I always say that the 4320 was actually kind of the first. I love all the 44s, but it started with the 4320 because that was the 540 or dual PTO tractor, small frame with a turbocharger. That remember they called the 4520 the Super 4020 at first, but it never really was because it really wasn't a 4020. This is a 4020 with just bigger everything.
Yeah.
As far as fuel tank and radiator, and I don't think there's a ton difference in the rear end, but yeah, they're just a cool tractor, and they're one of the nicest sounding tractors ever. I actually prefer the sound of them with a muffler versus a straight pipe.
Yeah, it had a straight pipe when I bought it, and I took it off. I like it better.
Yeah, they're nice for sure. But so you didn't grow up on a farm, but both your grandparents farmed.
Yeah, my grandpa Afdahl had sold the cows before I was born, but my grandpa Ray, I worked for him in high school and after a little bit.
And neither of those guys were John Deere guys, were they?
No. No, it's Farmall and Massey.
Right. So
I picked that up from my wife's family. They're John Deere people.
Yeah.
Once you get in one of these, you back in the day, especially in the 80s, you get into a sound guard cab, you're like, why would you ever get into anything else?
Right. All the guys complain about a sound guard cab today. That I always say that somebody that complains about a sound guard cab or even any of those early factory cabs, even like an 86 Series International, it's like you complain about it if you've never had a good cab.
Yeah.
If you
they were great. It was like a cockpit. Everything was right. All around you. You didn't have to lean or anything. It was all within reach.
And the post isn't in the middle of the cab if you sit like a normal person. Mm-hmm. If you lean towards the post, I guess it's in the way, but it's no different than having a muffler or something.
Yeah, it was put right to be in the same eye line as the muffler.
Yep. So you'd go help on your Grandpa Ray's farm.
Yeah, summers at first when I was 13, 14, 15, and then I lived with him in high school from later when I was 15 through till I turned 18.
Did your Grandpa Afdahl, did he farm at all?
Not while when I was a little, I suppose I was 4 when he sold his farm.
Okay.
Yeah.
But there are still Afdahls that farm up that way.
Yeah.
But most of your farming came from your Grandpa Ray then?
Yeah. Yeah, I never worked on it, not really. I helped Kurt's dad, Jerry, just a couple falls once, but
okay.
I was already milking my own cows at that time.
So your Grandpa Ray, he dairied in a freestall setup, right?
Yeah. Yeah, in the parlor. Yep.
So they were...
So I milked in the parlor long before I ever milked in the tie stall.
Okay. So now that's kind of interesting. So people would just assume tie stalls were out of date, and because when their barn was built in what, 80, 81, somewhere in there, right?
The parlor was, the freestall was somewhere in the mid to late 70s, I think.
Okay. So there's some interesting, you could describe it, designs for dairy setups in that era, because you probably saw some of the better tie stall barn designs around that time, and people are just getting into freestall parlor setups and some of the...
Yeah, they went backwards, for a while.
Yeah. I mean, we were talking about, the dungeon freestall barns, like we talked about on the Terry Weisenbeck video, where there's just basically a closed-up shed with no light in them at all and no ventilation.
Right.
And you house your cows.
I don't know what their thought was, where they thought that warm, moist air was going to go.
Yeah, definitely in the cow's lungs. Yeah. Not a great design, but even stranger to me, and we both have seen it's no longer, I imagine it's gutted now, but the UWRF, University of Wisconsin River Falls Lab Farm 1, had a tie stall barn with a parlor. So you would untie your cows from a tie stall barn, go milk them, and then tie them back up, which makes I don't understand who thought that was a good idea.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know what they were trying to accomplish. Saving yourself from bending over, I guess.
Yeah,
That'd be about it. But it required more labor.
but then you're bending over to tie the cows back up.
Yeah.
So I don't. Yeah, I don't.
Yeah, they held on to that way too long.
Right. Yeah, normally when you kind of roll your eyes when you hear of like a government agency, and in this case, like the UW system, needs a new building for something, when they built the new dairy setup, I was like, that's money well spent.
Yeah. I'm sure they could have done it cheaper, but yeah, it was long
Right.
overdue. Yeah.
But so your grandpa had expanded in the late 70s, early 80s.
Yeah.
And then
At
they had
the
a parlor.
exact wrong time.
Yeah. Yep. But you were milking there for him and worked with your uncle.
Yep.
And was it just basically the three of you guys on that farm?
Yeah, when I was younger, they had part-time milkers.
Okay.
When I got older, it was me, just me.
But they had harvestors there, right?
Yep. Yeah, I wouldn't say they liked them, but the so that's where I got my experience with them. But they've come quite a ways, in chain development, probably primarily. Chains are a lot better
Yep.
than they were back in the day. And since the 3 forage ones, since I put them up, we put the wider trough in them, so they have
The Atlas or Goliath or the
25 foot.
footer.
So it's
yeah.
it's a, what is it, a 24 inch? No, it's a 30. 30 instead of 24 inch wide unloader. So you have a bigger opening inside for the
Yep.
feed to fall into.
Yeah.
I've never really had any. We've never had a dig out. Never really had any issues.
Well,
You get the right. Granted, the service guys are better than they were too.
right. Well, they know a lot.
A lot more, yeah. So I've been well trained by, Risto Farm Service.
Yeah. Well, and there is some supply. There's alternative suppliers
Yes, yeah.
for parts. Where back in the day, like when your grandpa was building those silos, would that have been Brave Harvester out of Menominee?
Yep.
And that was it. Like,
Yeah.
if something happened, they're gonna take care of it.
And I'm sure they got everything through Harvestore themselves,
Right.
No third party.
Yep. So they were expensive, and then they were really expensive. Period to keep up.
Yeah. Yeah. They require a fair amount of money still,
Yeah.
but they're the perfect feed storage. I mean, you have a tiny footprint. You can feed as small amount out of it a day as you need to.
Right.
And you're never feeding fresh feed. You're always feeding fermented feed.
Yeah. Yep. That was the whole idea. And say you had some hay you were going to bale and it's going to rain. You can quick decide to chop that hay if you need to and put it in the harvester.
Certainly done that this year. Yeah.
Yeah. We're on the stave silo. It was, fold the unloader up, raise it. Then you'd have to, put this fresh hay down, level the silo, and start feeding on
Yeah,
fermented
and you'd be
feed.
about 4 hours late feeding your cows or whatever. Yeah.
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 Yep. Where the harvester, you could just keep feeding the cows.
Yeah.
and-
Yeah. We usually mix feed while we're filling.
Yeah.
To make sure that we don't pin that chain down.
Yep. So that, I'm surprised that, because I know your uncle had kind of mentioned some problems with the harvesters over the years.
Yeah, I remember
stories.
Cutting a hole in the side and throwing dynamite in once.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the feed was trapped and wouldn't settle.
Right. Yeah. And cutting feed out, feed the cows.
Yeah. There's a lot of issues. A lot of people hated them.
Right. So you weren't afraid of them after being around that.
Well, this farm did have the two. There was one on on the north side of the barn, and then the corn unit, and then there was a poured silo and a stave silo. So, there was a 2090 Harvestore here, and I had some issues with that. And when we bought the farm, I didn't have much money, so we were trying to limp along, and then a loader we should have walked away from.
Yep.
It's usually the case, you're running stuff too long. That's when you have problems.
Yeah.
Your arm starts climbing if it's war.
Okay.
So your service guys got to know their shit.
Right. Right. So you're milking for your grandpa. When did you decide you were going to farm for yourself?
Let's see. After I was working for my grandpa, I had left there and I was working for my in-laws, and I wasn't taking life too seriously at the time. And he didn't want me working for him anymore. So he said, just go farm for yourself. So that was the first I'd ever really even thought of it. I always ruled it out because I would never assumed I could start from scratch.
How old were you?
I was 21.
Okay.
So I mentioned the idea to my parents, and my stepfather worked he was a professor at UWRF, so he was buddies with the dairy science guys, and they got me in to sit down with them. We crunched some numbers, and they helped me out, and figured we could make an attempt. So I found a barn in the neighborhood that was empty, and asked the guy if I could rent it. He said I could use it for free if I help him with his beef cattle. And then I bought feed from my grandparents at first, right after they sold their cows, and then from another neighbor out of their TMR mixer for many years after that. But I rented that barn, or used that barn for 2 years, and then bought a 35-acre set of farm with a set of buildings, and then bought feed.
So where did you find out about that farm?
It must have been word of mouth. The one I bought?
Yeah.
Yeah, must have been word of mouth.
Okay.
It was listed for sale, but I don't know if I found it on my own.
Okay. And they probably at that time assumed that they were selling this 35-acre farm. It wasn't going to be dairied anyways, probably.
Well, there was still a fair number of us small guys starting up in that.
Okay.
And this is 94.
Yep.
So it was fairly common for young guys to be starting up.
I suppose. Yeah, I kind of forget that. Yeah.
There was one guy just 2 miles west, and there was another guy a couple years later, 2 miles southeast of that farm. So
Okay.
it was we were around, not like today.
Right. And that area today, well, where that farm is today is
It was a development, yeah.
right. The city has kept getting bigger and closer.
Yeah.
And it really got worse up in that area, especially after they fixed the bridge to cross the St. Croix River.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, that was just whisperings at that time when we moved out of there. But yeah, we knew there wasn't much future up there, for having service, and especially dairy equipment service and stuff like that.
Yeah, you had 35 acres, and I mean, obviously you can't farm if you have 35 acres and you're dairy farming. You can't farm all 35 acres because building site takes up so much. And then, was there a little pasture?
Yeah, I took the remaining 21, 22 acres tillable and split it into 3, and then I put it in hay 1 year, and then it would be pasture the second year, and corn silage the third.
Okay.
And then back to hay again. So I just had a little 3-way rotation.
Yep. And how many stall barn?
When I bought it, it was like 74 stalls. But I've in all my barns, I've never had a barn full of cows. So that first barn I used had 47 stalls, and I had 35 cows in there because those were small and they were stanchions, and
Yep.
I had some real nice big cows I had bought. So I'd put the biggest cows in 2 stalls because they were the big stalls in that barn were 46 wide and 5.5 feet long, I think.
Okay.
And then that farm I bought was 4x6 stalls because that barn was built in the 70s. And those were really outdated already by the 90s. They were getting kind of small.
Yep.
So I had remodeled that down from 74 to 55, 53 stalls. And made a couple pens and put in big stalls like we have now with loops and mattresses.
Okay. Yeah. That, and that's one thing I should ask with that first farm then. Had it been, how long had it sat where it hadn't been dairied in? Did you have to do a lot of work to it to get it?
No, I think it was less than a couple years. It was actually the Massey Ferguson's dealer in New Richmond's family's farm.
Okay.
First, the Brown family. It was Brown Equipment. And then I think they lost it. I think they lost it. And then this guy came from Glenwood City, bought it, and milk cows there for a couple years, and then sold it off. Sold the buildings off, kept the tillable land, most of it, and then later sold that for development. And then that's when we kind of felt like we needed to get out.
Okay. So he had, but I was on that very, very first dairy farm you had?
Oh, that had been sitting empty maybe a couple years. I remember going by there in high school, and he was still milking cows. So it was maybe empty 2 years.
So it did need some water lines fixed and...
Yeah, I poured new mangers. They had this countersunk mangers.
Oh.
Put new cement in that, and yeah, replaced some drinking cup valves.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a couple water pipes. But it was, all the milking equipment was there, but it was an 1.5-inch pipeline, and it had 3 units, and
Yeah. Little bulk tank.
yeah, a little flat top.
Yep. Sunset
Probably
or Dairy Cool?
Sunset, I think.
Okay.
Wash it by hand every day.
Yep.
And that was countersunk in the milk house. The bulk tank was like 1.5 feet lower than the rest of the floor because that guy's mom was the one that carried the milk to the milk house and had to pour it into the bulk tank. So they put that lower because she was a short lady and she had to pour that milk through the strainer in the top of that bulk tank.
Yep. That's funny. Yeah, because originally they probably had buckets and then you'd have to strain it before you'd
Yep.
run it through. Oh, he should have got his mom a step saver. He should have done. You know. So yeah, and was there a chance to buy that farm or anything? Because
No, that ended real ugly. That guy and he gave me 2 weeks notice to get out.
Really?
Yeah, coincidentally, I just found that farm that I ended up buying up there.
Really?
Yeah. So, yeah, he wasn't a bachelor, but he didn't have kids. So he was a little hard to get along with. He wasn't, and he had no life off the farm. So he was difficult to get along with.
Okay. So then, yeah, this one comes for sale. Well, if you had 2 weeks, did you have to tell them, I'll take it and I need to rent it right away before closing?
That's a good question. They must have let me in there before we closed. They had to have. I can't remember.
Yeah, that had to be a little interesting. Otherwise, what was your plan? Take them back to your father-in-law's?
No, he wouldn't have taken any cattle in there. I had actually talked to Zwalds about renting their tie stall barn.
Okay.
And another one in that neighborhood. I was trying to get it over to the Afdahls. Kind of where I was thinking I was going to end up. But.
Okay. So yeah, then this one comes up for sale, and who were you working with a bank, or did you have FHA to?
No, it was always at first it was First National Bank of River Falls, and then my loan officer went to Wisconsin. I've been there ever since.
Okay, so
no government loans.
Were they?
That's why I never had to milk a certain number of cows. I never had to have a barn full of cows. Set my own rules.
Yep. were they pretty, fine with you owning a farm? Because sometimes it's hard to get farm real estate's hard to buy. It's back then it probably wasn't. Maybe it wasn't as big of a deal back then because the numbers weren't as big.
Yeah, yeah. I paid 154.9, I think, for that first farm in 35 acres.
Yeah, and there was you couldn't buy any more tillable land then.
No. Okay. I had first right of refusal on the rest of that farm, but that was 2 years later after we bought it, I think, when he was trying to sell it, when he offered it to us then. And yeah, it was $3,500 an acre in 1999. That was, or 2000 maybe. That was a lot of money.
Yeah, absolutely. Because 99.
And it wasn't great land. It was marginal land.
Okay.
It was really light. Corn burned up often.
Yeah, there's irrigation up in that.
All over there, yeah.
Yeah. So, and you never had a chance. He never offered to rent it to you either?
No.
Okay.
But I didn't have any equipment, and I didn't have the power to get any equipment either at that time.
Okay.
Any leverage.
But your father-in-law did let you use his equipment?
Yeah. So that first farm, I could use that guy's loader tractor to feed some round bales. And then he took the manure. He had a manure spreader. The second farm, my father-in-law gave me a tractor in the winter to move snow. And I think then about a year and a half after I bought that, I bought a loader tractor, and then I bought a spreader. So I had a 2940 with a 148 loader.
Yep.
And I'd unhook it from the manure spreader, load up a load, hook it back up, spread it. Take a long time to haul manure.
Oh, yeah.
And then just slowly kept picking away. And when we moved here, then I had bought a few pieces of equipment. I had a 4560. And if you can imagine, I had, I think, 3,500 hours on it, roughly, when I bought it for, it was like 33,000, 35,000 mint.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I had a 6,400 with a loader. And I still had 2940. So when we first bought this farm, what I'd started doing right away, I did tillage and I cut the hay and then hired everything else done.
Okay. Well.
And hauled the solid manure. I've always hired the liquid pump and spread up until 2014, I suppose.
Okay. Well, let's talk about, so yeah, you've got 35 acres. You can't rent that land. You're buying your feed, which I suppose it worked.
That worked great, yeah. It always seemed tight to come up with that money, It was, if I remember right, that was like $100 a cow a month. It was maybe not quite that much, but it was a big check. I think I paid twice a month from the greatest people on the planet, and mixed to my specs, and they had been there for my protein mix. And
Okay. So you were, was that a complete feed you were paying them, or did you have to buy your own protein? And
I bought my own protein. Yeah.
Okay.
And yeah, they just gave me limitations on how many pounds that I could feed, of corn silage, because they had a limited amount.
Okay. So
and the number of cows I could really feed, I suppose.
Yeah,
because they were another 55 cow dairy, and they had uprights in a bag.
So there was no way for you to really grow up there at all then?
No, not unless you wanted to get into the buying baled hay thing or something.
Yep. So the guy has been renting the land out, and then he puts the other land for sale. You had first right of refusal. Did you even contemplate buying it, or was the number so? I mean, that number is big.
My net worth was, I don't know, $50,000, and to buy another 125 at $3,500, with the right cosigner, I'm sure I could have, but
yeah,
I was still uncertain of exactly what direction I was going. So and leery of that. I was leery of that quality of the land and leery of that area because of all the commuters.
Yeah. So that area in your lifetime had grown.
That year we moved, the township had approved 700 lots
Wow.
to be built, or houses to be built.
That's, yeah. So he puts that land for sale. Who buys that land?
A developer,
Yeah.
a big name developer that is buying a lot of the land in the area.
So then there is no doubt in your mind. You're like, well, if it's just going to be another crop farmer that buys it, we're okay. But
Right,
you were
right.
looking at this.
When we left there, it was you have to go to the bathroom in the house because there's no opening up the back door of the barn.
Yeah.
It was there was that guy and that guy and that guy. And you're letting your cows out, or you're having a bad day or anything, everybody's gonna know.
Right. And were you starting to have problems with people complaining about?
No, not that. No.
Okay, luckily there.
Yeah.
Which that does happen, and people need to understand when they move into an area and people are farming, there's going to be, they were there first, but at least that
and,
part.
and we use the land for a purpose.
Right.
Like, they were selling, I don't know, 2.5 acre lots. So it was a house, they'd mow around it, and then it would just be weeds.
Right.
Like, what did you buy that for?
Yeah. Yeah. So you could figure out that you could continue on like you were doing, and that was it, though.
Right, yeah. And my wife, we were married there shortly, 2 years after I bought that farm, we got married. So she was working off, and we knew we would want to have kids, and we knew she wouldn't want to continue working, and I don't think that would have been pretty tight. 35 cows, it was kind of the max we could have because of the feed source.
Okay.
So
yeah, what year then? So you decide you're going to start looking for a farm. Where were you going to go? I mean,
we kind of wanted to be close. I knew I was a big Packer fan at the time, so I knew I didn't want to go to Minnesota.
yep.
So that was no option. We looked in central Wisconsin, and then kind of followed the Mississippi down. We went down as far as Vernon County, and
And you said, didn't you talk to like Land O'Lakes, some people that were helping you?
yeah, a financial consultant from Land O'Lakes. We sat down with, and we were trying to see if a different farm in Pierce County, I think that's Pierce County, yeah, that would see if we could crunch the numbers, because that had an old small barn that wouldn't work, so we would have had to build a new barn, and right from the get-go. And he's like, yeah, that's really tight. He's like, but you're in the right area. He said, stay away from central Wisconsin. It's hard to make money out there. The growing season is surprisingly, it just falls off a cliff the further east you go on 10.
Okay.
So he said, my best clients, he said, are in that Mississippi River Valley. Just stay as close to the river as you can.
Okay.
So I was talking to, I've had ads in the shopper papers, and I was talking to realtors in this area, Pepin, Pierce, Buffalo, and down.
Yep.
But didn't want to be so far away from family that, you couldn't get there between Milkins and back.
Yep. Well, especially if you're going to have kids, they need grandparents and you need help, and it just, yeah. So you were looking at a few then.
Yeah, and we'd looked at one in Clark County, and one in Vernon County, a couple in this general area.
Yep.
But it was pretty slim pickings. That was like the end of the era where you could buy a farm and land that was set up to milk cows, and you could just pick up on day one. I mean, not that we didn't stick money in this before we started, but it was workable.
Yeah, so late 90s, early 2000s?
Yeah, it's 03.
Okay.
Yeah, spring of 03. So we were looking, from 2000 to 02. We found this in fall of 02, and they held it for us until we got ours sold.
Okay.
Actually, the next spring.
So back at that point, somebody would quit milking cows, and another person would milk cows there. That's the way it used to be, and it had been that way. If your kid would take over for you when you retired, and if you didn't have a kid that was going to come back, somebody else would buy your farm or rent it and buy it from you, and they would just milk cows on that farm. And then that stopped not long after that time. Like there were farms for sale, and it wasn't. We think of it today. There's, this place for sale, but it's just some land is for sale. They're selling this, 76 acres here. Or over here, you've got the building site off of a farm or something. If an entire farm comes for sale, it's generally pretty big news.
Yeah, and then generally a big crop farmer buys it and splits the buildings off and
Right.
sells the buildings to somebody from town. And
Yep.
yeah, and it's never a farm as it was again.
Yeah. And yeah, you got in right when that.
Yeah, I kept looking. I mean, you get obsessed. It's kind of like when you're looking for a classic car or something. You find one, but you keep looking after you get one.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's ingrained in you. You're so used to doing it. So I kept looking at farms in the paper just out of curiosity after we bought this one, and I didn't see anything that was a consideration that wasn't in central Wisconsin.
Right. Because that area was dairy. Where around here we were dairy, but the crop farming had
Yeah.
every time a dairy quit, there was more. That was another crop farmer.
Yep.
It was, so the crop farming had really started to take off. So yeah, it wasn't like over there. It was still that same way where somebody would just
Yeah, largely.
another dairy would start. So yeah, you were right at, and it just worked out. Well, you said it was kind of how this happened. You got this farm. It was a pretty cool story.
Yeah, so my wife Chris and I, every Sunday we go. I mean, because there was so few farms for sale even then, you get frustrated because I had a criteria of a 36-foot wide barn, because anything narrower than that, you'd have to have too small of stalls or too narrow of mangers to really be workable. So that was my criteria, and her criteria was kind of a great old farmhouse with a porch.
Yep.
So, and we had actually driven by your place a couple times before you bought it because we heard that was coming up for sale.
Okay.
So every Sunday we go for a drive, and we'd go all the way down Vernon County and back, or just hoping to come across something half the time, or there would be something that I saw on the paper we'd drive by. So we were on our way home one Sunday afternoon. I was milking 3 times a day, so it was later in the evening, but we stopped in Arkansas here at the park and just kind of put our heads in our hands, and we're just frustrated as you could be, like ready to give up, and we're never going to find anything. I said, well, there's this one farm for sale up on this bluff. We'll just drive by that on the way home, and the barn is only 32 foot wide, and the house was kind of added onto not prettily in the 70s, and so Kristen wasn't too excited. But we knew the land is really good here. It's really picturesque, and on our way up to that farm, which is 2 miles up the road, we drove by this, and I said, now that would be the perfect farm. And she agreed. Kristen was like, yeah, that is gorgeous. And the next day, a realtor that I had called a year earlier and said, I had told him, you ever get anything, let me know. We're looking, this is what we're looking for. And I think my criteria is 1 to 200 acres, like 50 cow barn. And next day he called me and he started describing it, and I knew right away he was talking about this farm. So it was a little fate there.
Yeah.
So we were really excited.
Yeah. And then you did some remodeling here.
Yeah. We had a 100-year-old 2-story barn, and then a 1-story Lester's addition from the 74. And I think he had 55 stalls and some calf pens. We gutted it and made it 53 stalls and one pen. I remember writing a check to Ken Anibus for 55 grand for that project. So it was mattresses and stalls.
Okay.
So we must have had probably about 70,000 in before we moved the cows in to the barn.
So your farm up there,
That was set up perfect. So we made this barn identical on the inside as that one-story Lester's was up there.
were you able to gut anything out of that to bring down here?
No, because we were milking cows up there
Oh,
till the
yep.
day we moved them. So we did sell everything out of there.
Okay.
What wasn't stolen. And then we set this up the exact same, put the cows in the same order. They caught on instantly to where their stalls were. It was pretty cool.
Really?
Yeah.
So there was no. Was it pretty smooth? Did the cows adjust real good? Was there a drop in milk production?
Well, we were kind of extreme on the production side back then. Extremely high. I think we dropped from like 103 to 88 or something that first pickup, but then we were right back all the way up.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. So what did you do for feed now?
There was a little feed in the silos here
Okay.
from a guy who had tried buying the farm on land contract and lost it back to the previous owner. Some from him, and then some from the original owner, which some of that ended up killing some cows from hemorrhagic bowel because it was a little sour. But
So when did you move? Was it spring or?
yeah,
Okay.
we brought we moved Kristen and the heifers down, and then 2 weeks later we moved the cows down and me.
Okay.
So I was milking 3 times a day up there, largely by myself. I had, I don't know, maybe 4 milkings off a week back then. And then I was coming down between milkings, going back and forth.
Yep.
So during the day. So it was exhausting.
So then you were able to plant a crop then that first spring.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was there, so buying corn wouldn't be a big deal to do. You could buy corn, right? Like dry corn.
Yeah, I just got that, from the mill, from the feed mill.
Okay. And then,
As a complete feed mix.
okay.
Yeah.
Was there hay here growing?
Yeah.
Okay.
But it was old stands. But it was good enough to keep some of it. But
Yeah.
it had to have been, 5, 6, 7 years old.
Well, and I'm assuming you were going to need your own hay
Yeah.
right away.
Yeah. There was like 30 feet in the 2090 of like 88 relative feed value.
Okay.
So, and when you had a 35,000 pound herd average, that was tough to swallow. But then I found some better stuff in a stave silo, but then that was what killed a few cows.
Oh.
Just too sour. It was who knows how old at the bottom of a stave.
Yep.
So
then at least you could, I mean, it probably got expensive to feed out of the Harvestore because you needed so much protein.
yeah.
But
We got by.
yeah, and then you were able to, did that give you enough cushion on hay where you could plow up and reseed some more stuff, keep the little bit of hay that's growing? So between that and what you had, that got you by, because obviously if you're going to seed a bunch down and then kind of, you're going to need corn silage, or were you pretty heavy on corn silage for a couple of years?
That's a great question. I can't remember. I think we were 50-50 at the time.
Okay.
Corn silage.
So, because I think back, 02 and 03 especially, I think 03, we had a drought, and it was really hard on the hay, and I was limited acres, so I was growing all my feed except my corn. I'd grow my corn silage and all my hay, but I didn't have enough acres for my corn. And or dry corn needs high moisture corn. And I remember that year, like I burned up my hay, like to feed them through the summer. Like there was hardly anything left. There was a couple of feet left in the bottom of the silo. And I think what I did with third crop or fourth, it's probably late third crop, we just left it grow because it was, so dry. And then I would mix that. I had an old Fox chopper on my 856, which had a loader on it, and I would go chop a little bit of hay to put on the bottom of the chopper box, and then we'd fill it up with corn silage. And I had enough corn silage. It rained enough for the corn. And we were probably 90% corn silage. And gosh, did those cows milk like crazy because they loved it. But the feed bill was...
Yeah, we've, just for that reason, we kind of, like we're feeding zero corn silage right now.
Okay.
But just because the feed bill is so much cheaper. I mean, our gross feed bill now is less than my gross feed bill was 25 years ago.
Really?
Yeah, just going from feeding 50-50 to zero corn silage. The corn silage diet is nice. It's stable, it's steady, it's predictable.
Harvest is simpler.
Right. Everything's harvested essentially at the same time, so the quality never changes. Whereas haylage, you're always cooking dry matters, and you're varying from crop to crop in quality, and so it's more challenging, but it's a lot more profitable to feed a high haylage diet.
What's interesting is, so I did the video with Leon Henneman, and you knew Leon.
Yeah.
And Leon went away from corn silage. So they grow their hay, and then they rent out the rest of their ground and buy and get part of the rent back is just corn. I think high moisture corn, maybe dry corn, but I think it's high moisture. But I said, what about corn silage? And they said, if we need some corn silage, we'll have some corn silage made. But they said, generally not. And
we're doing snaplage, so technically there's a little bit of silage.
Corn, yes.
There's a little bit of forage in that, but yeah, the snaplage is. I love the snaplage.
So, yeah,
we can do that ourselves, so we don't have to have a custom combine come anymore.
Okay.
That's the beauty of that too.
You got a snapper head you got a pull type yet?
Yeah. Yep.
And you got a snapper head for a pull type?
I found a 343.
Okay.
Yeah, last year, about a year ago right now, over in almost in South Dakota, western Minnesota.
Yep. Yeah, those were popular on maybe a 4400, but generally like a 3300 combine and then a 300 picker.
Yep. Yeah, all the 300 pickers. Yeah.
Yep.
And that's where you got to go to find them is South Dakota or western Minnesota. The beef guys out there made a lot of snaplage.
Okay. Yep. So then you're having to seed down a bunch of hay and get things going, but the cows adapted. You had a manure pit here. Did you have a manure pit in?
Yeah, we had like a 1 million acre lagoon up there. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, this one's like a 340,000 gallon concrete pit here.
Okay.
And that's one of the only things we haven't changed is that pit here.
Well, that pit up there then, did you even need to haul it very often? I mean, could you go every other year?
No, well, we did it every year. You get some runoff in there, and then it never, you try to, there's plenty of sediment in the bottom. So at one time it was 1 million.
Okay.
It would measure that it was 1 million, but there's an island in the center of Barn Lime, I'm sure.
Okay.
And it was just it was a 70s pit, so it was, let's just get a dozer and push up some dirt.
Yeah. A clay lined with
clay, but
flotation.
there's no clay up there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure there was a ton of clay right around New Rick.
Yeah.
Well, then, so you never had to haul every day then, and you didn't down here, which was good. So the 20 by 90, did you rebuild that?
No, because I needed it before I got it empty. So we bought a different one and then sold that one off.
Okay.
Because there still is a market for 2090s. They're still being put up, especially in Canada, a lot.
Yeah, I talked to Wayne, and he says they have 3 Harvestores getting built right now.
Yeah.
So you ended up remodeling the whole farm eventually, but
Yeah.
you added a milk house early on, right?
Right, because this just had I think it was 12 by 16 milk house, and it had must have been a 500 or 550 or something flat top bulk tank.
Okay.
So we were everyday pickup, and we needed to get something bigger. So, and I didn't want a bulkhead. Milk house wasn't worth saving that old one to bulkhead even something out of. So we built a new one, not planning on replacing the barn.
Yeah.
At that time, but
So did have a 2-inch pipeline?
yep.
Was it a De La Velle or?
Bomatic
Okay.
at the time. Yeah.
There were some Bomatic around here. Was that
Wait.
the?
Well, there was some. Yeah, I think that was all Bomatic equipment here. Yeah, because there was a Bomatic. I think the Durand Co-op was a Bomatic dealer. I think.
Well, I know they sold Universal. Wasn't there a Bomatic dealer in like Arkansas or something? I thought Breck Sweeney said something about
That
maybe.
could be, the locals would know better.
Yeah, but was that
You
the?
just stop over at Tom Milling.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Was that barrel claws?
Here, I don't
Yeah.
know what they had. I brought mine with me.
Oh, okay. You brought your own claws
Yeah.
and.
Yeah, I had Bomatic Flow Stars at the time.
Okay. How was did this have a TMR here?
No, it had the 4 silos, and they were all feeding a different thing. They were all
Really?
scattered. Yeah, so one was on the north side of the barn at one corner. One was in the corn unit was in the middle of the barn, and the stave was at the other end of the barn, opposite of the 2090. And then there was one out at a feed bunk.
So how did you? So you were feeding TMR up in New Richmond, so you come down here.
Yeah, I did what everybody did in the 90s. You put a mixer in the hay mow, and you run conveyors from everywhere.
Okay, I was gonna say I thought maybe you bought a cart, the TMR cart.
No.
Some guys.
Yeah, maybe those existed then. A Ristler.
Ristler cart, yeah.
No, we bought a Ristler TMR and put it in the mow because we weren't doing any baled hay.
Okay.
Never really fed any baled hay.
Was that a tumble mixer?
Yeah.
Okay. Which I had 2 tumble mixers.
Well, a chain mixer. So it wasn't a barrel that tumbled.
Oh, okay. Yep. I had 2 of those, and I always thought they were great because there really isn't that much to go on them.
Yeah.
You know, they were simple
Right.
and.
Yeah, those old barrel ones, the tumble, that was 2 bearings.
Yeah.
And a roller chain,
My first one was
a belt, and a motor.
I farmed something. It was stainless steel. It was made of stainless steel, and then the other one, my last one there that I had on my farm now was a SMC.
Yeah, that's what my grandpa had.
Okay, yellow and
Yep.
And the only
They're
thing
really cheap, I think.
were they?
I mean, money-wise.
Yeah. Well, that stainless one had an auger that ran, so it was long and round. And it had an auger that brought the feed up.
That farm in New Richmond had a TMR in it from like 1980 when I bought that.
Really?
Yeah, that was a James Way maybe.
Okay.
Something like that.
Or Van Dale maybe.
Van Dale, yeah.
Okay.
That was a auger mixer.
This one was a tumble mixer, but it had an auger that brought the feed forward. Where that SMC was just a tall, narrow.
Didn't you reverse it to feed out versus feed when you're mixing? Didn't you mix it one way and then you'd reverse it to feed out and open the door? Am I remembering that right?
No, I think when you open the door, it would just throw it out, if I remember right. I mean, there wasn't much to it.
No.
The gearbox locked up on it one time, and I just tore it apart and found some bearings up at Ellsworth Equipment that would, because it was just a spider gear and a worm gear, and that's all it was in that gearbox. I just took it apart, put some bearings in it, put it back together, and it worked.
Yeah.
But the scale never worked. So what I did with that was
that fluid filled.
Yeah. So I'd time it. I would, time how long it took to fill a 5-gallon bucket, weigh the 5-gallon bucket, and then you would know. And then the protein, I would, and occasionally you'd double check with a hanging scale or whatever, how much a 5-gallon bucket of protein weighed, and then you would just measure with buckets, and that worked, but so you had conveyors running,
Yeah.
which my farm was too. I mean, sometimes the conveyors were redundant. It's like, why'd you even put that one there? But I think it's just for looks, but
It's always confusing why they put the silos where they put silos, to me.
yeah.
They'd always have one or two by a bunk, one or two by a barn, but never next to each other. It seemed like they're always like scattered. Our farm in Richmond was like that. Is there 4 silos there? They were all scattered.
Well, yeah, because I think the idea was, well, you'll feed this in the barn, you'll feed this in the bunk.
Yep.
People didn't leave cows in the barn. They would turn them out all the time to eat, and
Even in the winter, they'd feed them something outside for a while.
Right.
Put them back in.
Yep. Only on the really, really cold days would the cows stay in, because in a normal winter day, you could get 3 hours before the barn would start to freeze up.
Yeah, I kind of equate it to like if they let the kindergartners out for recess, that's when my cows go out in the winter.
Yeah.
If there's no wind chill,
Yeah.
below 0 wind chill.
Yep. Because getting them out does seem to help a lot of things.
Yeah.
Heat detection and,
Yeah. And they can do their natural cow things, clean themselves better outside and interact with others.
Yep. I think they live longer. I think they,
Oh, yeah. If you look at a tie stall herd that doesn't go outside,
Yeah.
not good.
So then you're farming along, just kind of the way it was. You went to TMR and all that. When did you decide it was time to remodel the rest of the farm?
I guess you just start getting really crabby, the low ceilings and it needed to be rewired, and the Lester's barn the rafters were rotting from the nails loosening up in the roof tin.
Yep.
And some of those had blown off. That's when I discovered how rotten the rafters were. When some good storm takes some of the tin off, and you're like, oh, that's not really good wood anymore.
Right.
So then, you start pushing the pencil and mention it to the banker, and the banker said, yeah, I don't really want to lend you money to fix up that old barn. The rock walls, it was limestone walls in the 2-story. There's spots where you'd start stuffing stuff because some caulk or because the mortar was coming out between the stones.
Yep.
And there weren't really nice big rocks. There was almost more mortar than there was rock.
Okay.
So they were really, every morning you'd sweep up piles of dust.
Oh, really?
Along the walls, yeah. And I had, added more tunnel fans. There was some here. So I had opened up the one whole end, and it was, I got to the point where I said, okay, I know I can't milk in this barn till I want to retire, which is kind of never. But the barns, I figured had another 10 years in it before it was just not worth it anymore. So I said, let's see, I was crowding 40. I said, well, I'm not going to want to tackle a project like this at 50.
Yep.
So I said, let's do it now. And we penciled out, free stalls in a parlor.
Yep.
And, well, that just leads you down that snowball effect of, I need more. Well, now my silos aren't big enough. Well, because you need more cows to help pay for the parlors, and
Right.
free stall barns are expensive. I couldn't reuse squat of what I had, milking equipment or anything.
Yep.
So that would have been more cows to pay for it. Would have been more feed storage. My heifer shed wouldn't have been big enough anymore. The pit's not big enough anymore. The land base isn't enough. Then you're buying feed or buying land. I'm like, well, that does not sound like the right way for me. And I didn't want to milk more cows. I didn't know if I'd have kids that would want to milk cows.
Yep.
So I didn't want to, and I wanted a one-man show. So if I needed to, I could get everything done myself.
Yep.
And if tie stall barn is the only thing you can say, really, that you can do that.
Yeah.
If you have a parlor, you have somebody pushing cows 99% of the time.
Yeah, it's having to count on hired labor is a real pain.
Yeah, I've never. I had some good part-time guys that milked for me when I milked 3 times a day. But I always wanted to do my own work.
Yep. So how did you redo it? Because you were milking cows. You didn't move your cows out for.
No, they were in for everything except for when we took the haymow floor off.
Okay.
So it was we had a start date with Durand Builders, and I said to Kristen, I said, I'm gonna just see what I can do myself here tearing down, and when we need help, we'll call somebody. So the one weekend, Kristen and I took down the Lester's part. I mean, wow, that came down easy. You know, and the cows were still in it, but it was Lester's barns were like Legos. You know,
Yep.
just a couple nails every 4-foot stud. You'd pop that whole panel right off.
Did the? I'm assuming it was warm weather at the time, right?
It was March, I think, when we started, so it was warm enough.
Yep.
There was, some light frosts in the barn.
Did
after
you?
we had it opened up. So we started at the Lester's end and just kept working our way to the west.
Okay.
And got to the 2-story, and I'm like, well, I'll at least get the nails off the bottom of the tin of the old, was it hip roof maybe? So, well, then I can go a little higher yet, So we tore the whole thing down ourselves, except for we had a excavator come in and pull the walls away, the old stone walls.
Okay. So so you took the sides, the Lester's part apart. Did you pull the roof and everything?
Yeah.
So the cows are in open air getting milked.
Yeah, I milked in the rain a few times.
Did you did you make sure that you weren't due for an inspection from the milk inspector?
Yeah, because there was no milk house for a while.
Okay.
Yeah, everything luckily was hung on the outside of the barn wall. The receiver jar and all that whole group.
So I'm sure that would have been really good when the milk inspector showed up and you're.
Yeah, so we started tearing down and working our way west, and they started building on the east and following us. So by the time the last of the 2-story was down, they already had the new milk house, office, feed room, utility room built, and we're starting into the barn.
Okay. Oh, so you started on the opposite end. So that.
I started tearing down on the end, they started building on. So I just got a 2 weeks head start on them.
Okay. So the Lester's part was down on the east end.
Yep.
Okay. Huh. So when did they get it done? How long did it take?
It was the end of July when the wiring finally was done.
Okay.
When the last fans were wired up. So, yeah, it was for the most part, the building was under 2 months, I think.
Okay. So when the milk inspector did show up again, did he look and go, what?
I don't remember. But yeah, I just remember when the assessor showed up in the middle of the construction. And I'm like, oh, this is maybe not a good time for you to come. I said, what's this going to do to my tax bill? He said, oh, that's completely worthless. I will put $0 value on the barn or those silos that you just put up. He said, those aren't good for anything but that.
Right.
So they're worthless on taxes.
Yep.
Property taxes.
So Durand Builders was the ones that, you think is this the last tie stall barn they ever built, you think?
Yeah, they actually subbed most of it out. They did the concrete work and they subbed it out to Richardson Kohler, but yeah, I'm sure it's the last tie stall barn.
Okay. Did they design it though?
No, I did. They had some input from the company because it's naturally ventilated that we bought the windows and the chimneys from.
Okay.
So they kind of set the standards of, the pitch of the ceiling inside, and And what they needed for wall for those windows.
Yep. So when was it all completed then? What year would that have been?
2010.
Okay. Now, after milking it now for 14 years, is there anything you'd change?
Well, it'd be better on top of a hill. But for ventilation purposes.
Right.
You know, I would have maybe toyed with the idea of, instead of having chimneys to naturally ventilate, maybe have a ridge that opened or closed.
Okay.
I feel like some days the air is just too heavy to funnel up through those chimneys, and that's when you have, when your dew point's 68 or higher, then you got to turn the fans on.
Could you okay. Yeah. You still have some tunnel fans that you can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, instead of running, in a traditional tie style barn, you'd have one tunnel fan on 365, and then all summer I have 6 of them, you'd have at least 4 going. But I have it down to about 2 to 3 weeks a summer that, it's dependent on what's going on that day.
Yep.
Nothing's automated. It's all, we're here.
Yeah.
You look at the forecast, you say, well, looks like we should get enough air movement today.
Right.
Leave it open.
So then, how'd the cows react? Was there any change in production through the construction process?
Not really, no.
Okay. Did they milk better with this setup than they did with the old barn?
No, we've maximized, cow comfort 25 plus years ago.
Okay.
Really, big stalls and a comfortable bed. So no, I knew I wouldn't get more milk, but we went from feeding a high input diet to feeding the lowest possible input diet, essentially.
Yep.
So we get significantly less milk than we did 25 years ago. We had a 35,000 pound herd average. I spent years over 100 pounds of milk without ever dipping below.
Yep.
And now we're much happier in the low to mid 80s.
Is there less vet?
Yeah, almost no vet, yeah.
Okay.
So we had the vet out for the first time in 13 months about a month ago, because I needed a prescription drug, and they can't give it to you if they haven't been to your farm within the last 12 months. They can't write you a prescription. So I had to call them out just to look in the barn and then give me the medication.
So herd health better, reproduction better with the lower production?
No, because you were feeding additives to help your production when it was higher.
Okay.
So I wouldn't say anything is necessarily better, just more profitable.
Okay.
I mean, because you start down that road of feed additives, it's very similar to human medications. I kind of correlate the two, so or compare the two. So the more medications a person on is, the more medications a person needs to be on.
Yep.
Because you have so many side effects. Same thing with feed additives. You start feeding this, you'll see that bump in protein test or whatever, fat test or production, and they'll say you'll make some money on it, but no one ever considers the side effects that all leads to. So
I remember more than once, and I changed the way I dairied at the end, and things went a lot better. I wish I would have done things that way.
The nice thing is, when we had that big production, I learned a lot from the vets, because I had the vets out here a lot.
Yep.
So now I really don't need to call a vet unless it's a surgery. That's the only thing I can't do myself.
Yep.
I can diagnose anything.
Yep. But I remember when they were adding urea to your protein, I thought, wait a minute, we're adding urea.
Yeah, we were feeding blood meal and
yeah.
yeah.
Like that doesn't seemed to make sense to me. It was all
And bypass fat, you
Yeah.
know, that's animal fats.
non-ruminant, but because it had to be non-ruminant. But I just remember thinking, this ain't.
Yeah, so, you know, I've been milking, you know, 40, 50 cows for 30 years, essentially. You think, well, nothing's changed. Well, every day is an experiment. Because to stay viable in this industry at any size, you can't be satisfied where you're at. You have to be experimenting. Can I be better?
Yep.
Can I be more efficient? Can I be cheaper? Or can I get more production without more problems?
Yeah. Yeah, it's not about production, it's about profitability. And sometimes,
And sanity.
well, you have to add that as far as sometimes there's value there that it's hard to put a price tag on. You know, and that sort of stuff becomes more important the older you get when you can realize that.
Yeah, when we were milking 3 times a day, and I had started cutting out a lot of feed stuff, I had an independent feed consultant for the first time, and I really learned that you don't need a lot of that stuff that the feed mill was selling you. Then we got, you know, production was down in the low 90s, and I always said, you know, 3 times a day doesn't pay unless you're that mid 90s and up, you know. And then but it was hard for the ego to let go of the 3 times a day.
Yep.
But I kind of realized I was 40. I'm like, I don't need to be, and we'd established ourselves. I don't need to be proving anything anymore.
Yeah.
I was always starting from scratch and with nothing. The only thing you knew was to keep fighting, you know, and pushing for everything, trying to get everything you can out of everything.
I don't think people that didn't start it that way really understand it, because I've had guys say, like, well, yeah, well, I mean, I bought this corn planter. Like, well, there's a big difference between you buying that corn planter when you're trading your dad's corn planter in, or you use your dad's corn planter for X number of years until you finally got around to buying your old one. When you start from nothing, I mean, it's...
Yeah, and not that I didn't get help, but, you know, I did. But boy, is it freeing when you don't need to ask for help anymore. Then you feel like you made it.
Yeah. And I always said this too, like when they were talking, and I don't think this thing ever did get settled, but they were talking about the USDA discrimination thing where they were forgiving loans because people were discriminated against. And I was talking to somebody about how I thought this was wrong because they were forgiving loans from people well after the settlement from when this was supposed to have happened. And this person said to me, they said, well, do you know what it's like to be a discriminated farmer? And I said, I absolutely do. I said, you want to be discriminated against, you be a 20-some-year-old kid.
And everybody you meet says, you're never going to make it.
Right. They're like, I'm not, you know, there's people that are like, we can't sell you anything because you're never going to, you know. Yeah, there's a lot of that.
Yeah, I every single step along the way, someone has told me, well, that'll never pay, or you'll never make that work.
Right.
You know, you can't possibly buy your feed, you know, or you can't pay for that silo, you know.
Yeah.
You can't cash flow a farm. Every step.
Yeah, you know, and I'm not saying that there aren't people that were discriminated against, but I absolutely, as a young dairy farmer in Wisconsin, it was a real thing. Well, and how many times over the years did somebody, you know, decide, you know, they'd get a loan to go milk cows and they'd rent a barn and buy feed, and I don't know what the ratio would be, but I mean, it's in probably less than 10% of them ever made it.
Yeah, and I feel like I mentored most of those guys. There's a lot of guys that would come to me for advice after I, you know, was 5-10 years in, and they're wanting to start, and I tell them, you know, to take baby steps, and then they go out and buy a brand new some piece of equipment, and then 6 months later they're gone.
it's like, and I think a lot of it was, if you're gonna do that, you're gonna rent a barn and buy feed, then you rent a barn and buy feed. But you can't buy a tractor, then, like you can't have money tied up into something else. Like, so if you're gonna buy your feed, you can't buy a line of haying equipment and do
At
a
the
little
same
bit
time.
of hay.
Yeah.
Right. It just
Yeah.
doesn't work. It's one or the other.
Yeah.
And long term, buying your feed is tough because you are generally, when commodities are high, that pulls livestock prices higher. But sometimes there's a lag in there. So you can get stuck with selling cheap cattle and milk and paying high feed prices, where at least I think long term you have to grow your own so that you can have more control. The more things, for me, and this isn't for everybody, I'm not saying this is the only solution that anybody could ever have, but for me, myself, the more I've done for myself, the better.
Yeah.
Because I can control my costs.
Custom guys were nice when you couldn't afford equipment.
Yep.
But once you can afford equipment, custom guys suck because they can't give you priority.
Right.
So you're gonna get them when you get them.
Except for Tom and Sam are very good. But
Tom, yes, Tom was excellent. Sam was pretty good.
yeah. Yep.
But as they get bigger, it's hard for them to give any emphasis on their smallest customer, right?
Right.
It's tough. I mean, I don't blame them at all. They got to do what they got to do,
Yeah.
and that's when it became more profitable for us to do our stuff ourselves.
Yep. And for
once
me,
the kids are big enough.
well, for me too, I remember a custom guy, me and my buddy Chad used to chop together. And I remember the custom guy telling us one day, I don't know why you guys piss around with that. You could just hire me. We'll come in a few hours and get it done, whatever, And, well, how much is that going to cost? And I forget what he quoted us. But it was substantial. And we both looked at each other and went, man, if we took that kind of money and just invested it back into our own equipment, we'd have really nice equipment. And then they'd say, well, this way you could spend more time in the barn. We both were like, we spent enough time in the barn. I kind of want to go sit in the tractor for a while.
Yeah, we need variety.
Yeah, why are you taking away the fun part of farming?
Yeah, people would always say, you're a good cow man. You must not be any good at, equipment. I think you can be good at both, can't you?
Well, right.
If you're a really good cow man, you're not in the barn all the time.
You don't need to be.
Yeah, because shit's clicking by itself.
Right. And there are guys that don't love field work, and there were guys that when they got away from, when they went to cash cropping instead of dairying, found their place because they only dairy farmed because they had to dairy farm. And once they went crop farming, they were probably a better farmer. I've said that, like, there's people that shouldn't have had livestock that had livestock. That, the old guy that, you walk in the barn and the cows are all a little suspect, and there's a aluminum baseball bat or something in the barn, and you're like, man,
Yeah, I knew a guy who used to carry a claw hammer all the time.
Yeah.
You'd be like, how'd that leg get so swollen, huh?
Yeah. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And I think like that probably doesn't happen now, because if you're farming now, you have to be a good farmer. Like, you really can't be a crappy farmer.
Yeah, you'd think so, but there's still some out there.
Yeah.
If they inherited their farm, there's some of that. If they're a bachelor or bachelorette, their whole life.
Yeah.
There's still some sketchy stuff out there. There's still some people who can't keep their cell count legal.
Yeah.
But I remember people saying to me 25 years ago, oh, those guys got to be almost all gone by now. It's always another one that pops up. It's kind of like a cow with a high cell count. You ship that, like, all right, you got rid of my high cell count cow. Well, someone always steps up and takes the place.
Yeah. But yeah, there are guys that just probably are better without livestock, and but I certainly didn't ever want to give up the livestock so that I could, or give up the tractor so I could.
Yeah, the
Oh,
beauty of livestock is then you have a complete system, an all-encompassing system. Your cows are your fertilizer, you know. The only
well,
thing we buy is seed. We don't buy any fertilizer. Everything. We buy barn lime, which then limes the fields.
yeah,
So it's just everything's. Their bedding builds organic matter in the soil.
the the beauty of cattle, and for those the people that try and hate on livestock production and stuff, is you're taking an animal that would eat something that we cannot as human beings eat and get any kind of value out of it. Like, you can't eat grass and live on that. It doesn't work. But a dairy cow could do that and provide us with something, and we'd have these. I say that to the people that are talking about greenhouse gas and cattle emissions like that. Well, if you're raising forages, perennial forages, and having dairy cattle, I would sure think, if you're trying to say there's greenhouse gases from the dairy cattle, you're certainly offsetting that with carbon capture in your perennial forages, aren't you?
Yeah, and no one talks about that. It's always about cover crops on the corn bean guys.
Right.
No one's ever talking about what dairy farmers have been doing forever.
Right.
And perennial forages.
I mean, and I don't dislike anybody that's got a large dairy, but I will always stand by the fact that I think we were better off with smaller herds, that manure was spread out and hayfields were spread out, and I think it was better environmentally.
Yeah. Yeah. The only reason, well, there's a couple reasons that small farms have died, small dairy farms have died. The university pushing the big ones is a big reason.
Yep.
Ego is another big reason.
Yep.
Right? And then the changes in society. People are trying to work less and less and do less and less physical labor every day. And then so this becomes unappealing to the average person.
Right. It was kind of, people value their time more. And I always say that, like, I remember when I first got a regular job years ago, after milking cows as a kid, you got a regular job and you didn't have to work on the weekend or something like that. And you take it for granted that it's like, oh, whatever, But when you milk cows all the time and you got a milking away, you really savored that and enjoyed that.
Yeah.
So I think the lifestyle of dairy is fine. I mean, it on chores, and sometimes I know some dairy guys that'll really pat themselves on the back because they did chores. And to me, chores were just almost automatic. Like, you just did them.
Well, and they're very grounding and humbling, and it's your, like, the basic routine of your day.
Yeah.
You don't feel right if you don't do them.
Well, like, without chores, you got to get up in the morning. You got to go, okay, what are we doing? What's the plan today? Where when you're milking cows, you get up in the morning and you go milk cows, and then you've got, a couple hours worth of chores to go, oh, we should probably cut hay here, or,
Yeah.
whatever we're going to do. When choring went good, I didn't mind doing chores. There's something relaxing about milking cows when it's going good. And don't get me wrong, there's days when it was miserable because everything was going wrong. But in general, and when chores were good, I didn't really mind chores. I don't think my knees could take it today after they haven't done that for so long. But one time it was fine. Listen to the radio and milk cows.
Yeah.
A lot of thinking. It was almost like driving.
Yep.
Yeah,
and when you have problems in the barn or something going on, then it takes that fun away from it.
Right. Yeah. When everything's working good, it's fine.
Yeah.
But it obviously there's some real problems. But in general, I think we'd probably all be better off if we has a few more chores to do, you
Yeah.
know, as
Yeah,
a society.
I can't imagine living the other side where you have a desk job and now you have to exercise, like do senseless motion
Right.
and accomplish nothing just to get to maintain your health, whereas you could be working at the same time and maintain your health.
When I was, and I always laugh that when I milk cows 3 times a day, I was doing 19 milkings, and I could literally eat 3,500 calories a day minimum. And I mean, I was slim as could be. And if I ate a meal, I didn't have time. I never cooked. If I ate a good sit-down meal, it was bar food. You
Yep.
know, so I live on bar food and convenience store stuff, and never put an ounce on. You know,
Yep.
yeah, that was one of the real benefits of dairy cattle. You know, but there's times that I miss it, but I do like seeing small dairy still around. I say that all the time. I don't drive by a large dairy and go, man, I wish I could be doing that. But there's times I'll drive by a small dairy and go, that wouldn't be so bad to milk cows today. You know.
Yeah, it's getting lonely out here as a small dairy farmer.
Yeah, and that's the part I think that would be the toughest for me now is you had your group of dairy farmer friends that you had that common occupation and in the wintertime we'd Taco Tuesday, and the bars would have a Taco Tuesday for lunch or something. It's like, we can go to Taco Tuesday, or you want to run to runnings or let's run up to Fleet Farm or something like that. You could do that, but now there isn't. I mean, it's amazing. I never thought I would see the change that we have. Like, are we from say?
I always thought it would come, but I didn't realize how it would feel. Like lonely.
Well,
Like unrelatable. Like no one can relate to our lives.
If you take 35 in the last 35 years, do we have 5% of the dairy farms left? I don't know if it'd even be that high.
I'm not sure.
I mean,
I've read it enough times, but I didn't retain it.
yeah. Well, you kind of get used to that number. Just they'll tell you that this many dairy farms are left, or this many have left this year, and you just kind of tune it out because it's just noise.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I guess the reason we're in it is because we try not to worry about what other people are doing, and just do what makes sense to us.
Yeah.
And just keep moving forward. It's not like I ignore the fact that people are putting in robots, or people are getting out of dairy, or people are going big. It's that every time I consider that, it doesn't make sense to me, and we just do what makes the most sense, and that's how it's got us here and got us sitting pretty good.
Yeah. Well, should we show them the barn?
Sure.
All right. So that's the farm when you bought it.
Yep.
Then this farm, not
Yep.
the first one.
Right.
And then this.
That's maybe 2 years later.
Okay. So
one more silo.
you built another Harvestore in there. And,
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's the 2-story. That was a cool old barn, though.
Yeah. But every nail leaked in that whole roof.
Yeah, they put tin on it, and
Yeah, and the nails all worked loose, and the hay used to soak that up in the hay mow, but we didn't have any hay in the hay mow, so then it was going through and it was shorting out wires, and
that's fun. Yeah.
floor was rotted. You couldn't drive anything up there anymore.
You did have I guess you can't see the old farm, but that was back when you started then, you said.
Yeah.
And
That was my first herd of cows.
select sires.
Yeah.
Breeding select sires. See? What, should we show them the cows?
Sure.
So. So it is, it's a summer day. It's a cool day today. But yeah, nice open air, which is the exact opposite of a lot of old barns that were just dungeons.
Yeah.
And that's why a lot of times you keep them outside all the time.
One thing that was hard for the cows to transition to was how quiet it is. They were so usually you get a stranger walks in here, or someone with like plastic boots on,
Yep.
and the cows all jump up because they're not used to hearing anything.
Yep.
It's so quiet in here. And then
Well, they were used to hearing tunnel fans run
right,
all
so
the
it was
time.
a hum all the time, and it was a loud hum. And then when we took out the posts from the 2-story, then the cows couldn't find their stalls anymore. There was no identifying. A cow, you always think, well, she knows the smell of her stall. Well, that's kind of true, but often it's so many steps and then turn. So they'd come in after we took those posts out, take so many steps and go, wait, is it there or there?
Yeah. Yeah, so you've got names, and every cow gets its own stall, right?
Yeah.
Are they all still registered?
Yeah, they're still registered. We don't, but it's a closed herd. We don't
Okay.
buy anything. We only sell off the bottom, cull cows. So nothing, we don't show anything. Nothing can leave and come back.
Okay.
And that was probably the biggest noticeable thing we ever did, improvement, was close the herd up. You deal with the issues that you currently have, and you can defeat those, and now you don't have those anymore.
Yeah.
So when we used to house some high-end registered cattle for people, and I used to buy a lot of cows
Yep.
early on, but you'd inherit that herd's problems. So every cow from a different herd, you got all those problems now together.
Yeah.
And then you didn't know what you had. It might take a while to figure it out.
Yep.
So we dealt with Yonis, we dealt with BBD, obviously hairy warts and stuff, but there was one guy that wanted to buy, that was calling me, had read about me in Hordes Dairyman or something, and wanted to buy some genetics from me, some cattle. I'm like, and he said his herd had been closed forever, over 100 years. It was a closed herd. I said, I'm not selling you anything. I'm going to ruin your life.
Right.
Just use.
Right.
I said, buy embryos or just use really good bulls. You'll get there eventually.
Yeah.
It was. I can't emphasize enough how important a closed herd is in today's world.
Yeah, well, it used to be, biosecurity on the hog side has been huge for a long time.
Yeah,
But
we've been slow to adopt that. And maybe this avian influenza will scare a few more people into being closed. But we went from vaccinating everything the vet would sell you.
Right.
And even making our own autogenous vaccine for Clostridia, because that's something we deal with a lot here on this farm, to now we vaccinate with nothing for nothing.
Right.
So once you know what your problems are, you can fix those problems and then be done with those problems for the most part.
Yeah. No, you never worried about dairy cows. You always thought, well, cows are fine. You don't have to worry about that. And then
Yonis came along.
Yeah, Yonis, and then even which I didn't deal with Yonis, but we lost some cows with a really weird bacterial infection. The U of M figured it out. We lost 10 cows within a week. Out of the blue, this came, and the vet pointed out that was a large freestall set up close to me that had the same pigeons roosting there that roosted, around my stuff.
That's why we have bird netting on all the windows.
Yeah.
Keep the birds out.
Yep. And I'm not saying that for sure came from him or not, but they could have got it out of the dirt too. Soil does carry stuff in it.
Yeah.
But that was a frustrating ordeal when you milk 50 cows and you lose 10 cows in a week. It's pretty devastating.
It is, yeah.
But we got through it, and it all worked out. But yeah, there's the Harvestores. I suppose you got Goliaths and Alliances, right?
Not really. They're all Goliaths now.
Oh, are they?
There was one that was an Alliance, but it's pretty much all been converted over to Goliath.
Okay. So that's still that Whistler TMR you had.
I replaced it. That's the second one I've had.
Okay.
But yeah.
Yep.
It's less than 10 years old now.
So you got, yeah, it is the wide trough
Yeah.
on these unloaders. Well, yeah, because Wayne only really likes Goliaths,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
He doesn't care for...
He doesn't like the new stuff, or the Alliance was kind of a joke. But
All that did is have an automatic advance, right?
yeah. Yeah.
And then an oiler, chain oiler.
Yeah. Yep.
You'd add vegetable oil or something.
Yep.
To the...
Yeah.
Yeah. So the corn unit is the only one original to the farm.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that kind of, yeah. We built the rest around that, I suppose.
Okay.
So that one's built too close to the barn because it used to be an auger, used to be a sweep. So they used to pull that through the feed room door into the barn to pull that out. So now that one has to go in and out in pieces.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you can't full pull that one.
And that, so you're running a chain unloader now.
That's corn silage in that right now.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So you got high moisture corn in one of these?
No, snaplage is in that one.
Oh, that's right, snaplage. Okay.
This is heifer feed. The newest one is cow haylage.
Okay. So snaplage and haylage, and then heifer feed is whatever gets rained on or
Yeah, first crop went in
oakage.
there this year, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and then usually, yeah, the new seeding gets
Yep.
dropped in there.
And then, so very little corn silage gets fed then.
Yeah, that's probably going to go back to snaplage, though. And
Okay.
I'm going to flip-flop. I'm always experimenting and changing my ideas.
Yep. Huh. Any problem with this conveyor freezing in the winter?
Only if you get a freezing rain.
Oh, yep.
Overnight.
I suppose.
So you got
Yep.
to turn it on. Otherwise, no.
Huh. It's interesting. Oh, this is a later model Goliath then, ain't it? Judging by the shield.
Well, that's just a shield.
Okay. Yeah.
They're all just pretty much just parts and pieces. I think I've only bought ever 2 unloaders. Otherwise, they just keep getting, updated
Yeah.
as they wear out, as parts wear out.
Yeah, he kind of has his own way of building these unloaders, right? Rebuilding them and yeah.
Yeah. This is the old trough from the Alliance.
Okay.
So that's from when we put the silo up. So that's almost 20 years old.
So this one was the first one that you built right here.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, these 3 were all used silos we put up.
Yep.
Not
Who
new.
built them all? Who built them for you?
This one was Brave,
Okay.
and that one were
Well, I'm
the
assuming-
guys that bought Brave.
Oh, okay. So that was, well, Gen X owned them for a while, right?
They inherited the dealership, but they didn't buy out Brave. It was somebody from over by Green Bay. And
Okay.
then they lost it. And then the newest one that was put up through Risto,
Okay.
he had somebody build it.
And he's actually building them now,
Yeah,
I guess.
yeah.
Is this all the silos you're going to build, or could you use one more for something?
We could always use a spare if you needed to like do a floor or something, but they all have epoxy floors in them now, so they should be good for a while.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Well, didn't you'd like a little tiny one too, though, wouldn't you? One of the old
Yeah,
narrow blue tops.
just for eye candy. Yeah,
Yeah, decoration.
yeah.
Be. Well, I know where there's one sitting you can have. You know.
You bring it over.
Yeah. Just tip it down on the trailer and just haul it.
Yeah, sounds easy enough.
If they'd go away from these dang overhead power lines, it'd be a lot easier to move a silo, wouldn't it? You know? Yeah. No, that's pretty cool. All right. Well, thanks, Brad.
Yep.